In 1873, Italian ballerina Giuseppina Morlacchi, already hailed on the stages of Milan and Paris as the Incomparable, married former U.S. Army Scout John Burwell Texas Jack Omohundro in Rochester. Later that same year, the two shared the stage with William F. Buffalo Bill Cody in The Scouts of the Prairie, a play the newspapers billed as the first Western ever staged for an American theater audience. A mine built on the slope of the Cripple Creek Gold District, Colorado, circa 1893, when the field, discovered in 1891, was drawing a heavy flow of investors and laborers in search of gold, transforming the local landscape and economy. Former Sheriff Patrick F. Garrett, famous for killing Billy the Kid in 1881, was shot dead by goat herder Wayne Brazel on February 29, 1908, on the Mesilla Road near Las Cruces, New Mexico Territory. A dispute over grazing rights produced conflicting accounts and led contemporaries to suspect a plot involving ranchers opposed to Garrett. Photo, early 1900s. The photograph captures John Dunn, a carpenter by trade and amateur photographer, pausing from his morning tasks to drink coffee in front of the wooden cabin that served as his workshop. Beside him stands the wagon converted for the traveling laundry service that made the rounds of Missoula, Montana around 1900. On December 26, 1862, the day after Christmas, the largest mass execution in U.S. history was carried out in Mankato, Minnesota. 38 Dakota men, condemned by a military tribunal after the Dakota War of 1862, were hanged simultaneously on a wooden gallows erected in the town square under Army Guard, and with President Abraham Lincoln's final approval. Photograph of a chuck wagon used by cowboys and camp cooks during a rodeo in Texas, 1900. A typical vehicle of the southwestern prairies, it carried provisions, utensils, and bedding, allowing trail crews to travel long distances between ranches and arenas without relying on fixed infrastructure. In 1885, Bat Masterson, former Ford County Sheriff and ex-scout, returned to Dodge City at the request of old partners to arbitrate a standoff between cattlemen demanding free passage for their herds and merchants asking for compensation. The prestige he had accumulated over the years allowed him to broker agreements without resorting to guns. The episode symbolized the waning of frontier violence in Kansas and the consolidation of courts, civil statutes, and regular patrols. Chung On, a dealer in Chinese goods, established in Virginia City, Montana, 1896. Part of the immigration that followed the gold rush, he supplied tea, silk, porcelain, and rare spices to both the Chinese community and Euro-American miners, serving as a cultural and economic bridge between them. His warehouse on Wallace Street illustrates the persistence of Asian commerce even after the mines declined. In 1878, the processing yard of the firm Rath & Wright in Dodge City, Kansas, was crammed with roughly 40,000 buffalo hides, compelling evidence of the peak of commercial hunting that, throughout the 1870s, nearly drove the Great Plains bison to extinction and supplied tanneries in the eastern United States. Millie Ringold was born enslaved in the American South. Freed in the 1860s, she gradually crossed the nation to what was then the territory of Montana. In 1879, she settled on the banks of Yogo Creek, where she prospected for gold in the alluvial deposits that drew many migrants. With the proceeds from her work, she built and ran a boarding house that offered beds and meals to mine laborers. In 1892, workers were laying the rail bed out of the mining camp of Quigley in Granite County, Montana, to link the gold mines to the main line and from there to the smelters at Anaconda. The image captures the moment when, armed with shovels, they level the ground and set the ties, a crucial step to ensure ore-laden cars could reach the market. An image taken in Montana in 1887 shows 7 chiefs of the Crow Nation posed in front of a territorial building, at a time when they were striving to protect their land rights and safeguard tribal autonomy against the growing assimilation policies promoted by the United States government. railroad structure built by the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, the forerunner of the future Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, that around 1870 spanned Canyon Diablo in northern Arizona Territory, allowing the permanent line to continue toward Flagstaff, and speeding the region's integration into the national commercial routes of the United States. Photograph of the sod block farmstead built by James McCrae on the south bank of the Middle Loop River, near the then modest settlement of Berwyn in Custer County, Nebraska, 1888. The image illustrates the pattern of agricultural settlement on the Great Plains, showing how the scarcity of timber led Euro-American homesteaders to raise dwellings from the very turf of the fertile soil. Established around 1882, the Monkey Saloon, run by local entrepreneur Boss Caswell, occupied a wooden building on the banks of the Arkansas River in the then mining village of Granite, Colorado. It served as a meeting place for prospectors, stage drivers, and travelers, offering distilled spirits, card games, and news from the Silver Lodes. After the failed simultaneous robbery of two banks in Coffeyville, Kansas, on October 5, 1892, lawmen gather the bodies of brothers Bob, 23, and Grat, 31, Dalton. Both were killed in a fierce gunfight with armed townspeople and local posses, an event that ended the short but violent career of the Dalton gang. During the 1870s, dogs held a decisive place among the Uinta Ute. They guided migrations, pulled travois loaded with belongings before the full adoption of the horse, guarded the tipis, and appeared in stories that explained clan formation. They also provided tails and hides for ceremonial ornaments, and their presence was required in certain hunts deemed clean by the elders. Thus, the animal assumed practical, defensive, and symbolic functions, weaving itself into the group's social structures and ritual norms. At the beginning of 1915, a Texas Rangers patrol entered the King Ranch in South Texas. They captured 3 cowboys of Mexican origin, Jesus Garcia, Mauricio Garcia, and Amando Munoz, and after shooting them, looped ropes around the bodies and displayed them as a warning during the turbulent period of the Bandit War on the border. In a 1925 photograph, Wyatt Earp, then 77, stands on the bank of the Colorado River and gazes at the Arizona Territory, the site of his tombstone gunfights 40 years earlier. The scene shows the veteran lawman at the old crossing used by migrants and stagecoaches since the Civil War, offering a late witness to a frontier already fading away. Studio photograph of Jimmy Sequent, a member of the Northern Shoshone Group, taken in Pocatello, Idaho, around 1897. The image comes from the period when itinerant photographers set out to document indigenous figures for ethnographic collections and memorial archives, providing today a valuable visual source on Shoshone presence in Idaho at the end of the 19th century. This carte de visite portrait, made in 1884 at the San Carlos Apache Reservation, Arizona, records Geronimo during the period when, already surrendered to the U.S. Army, he lived under federal supervision. According to photographic documentation found so far, it is the earliest known image of the Chiricahua leader. Standing 6 feet tall, Mary Fields, Stagecoach Mary, was born enslaved in Tennessee in 1832, gained her freedom after the Civil War, and worked in a convent in Ohio before moving to Montana. In 1895, she became the first black woman hired as a star route mail carrier in the U.S. She drove a wagon and mules more than 300 miles each week. Though her temper was said to rival that of a grizzly bear, she was held in esteem in Cascade. In 1878, Dodge City, Kansas, was a key frontier entrepot. The arrival of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway in 1872 had made it the terminus of the Texas cattle trails. Thousands of head passed through its pens and went by rail to eastern packing houses, supporting taxes, saloons, and gambling. The seasonal population brought together cowboys, buffalo hunters, and merchants, while sheriffs Pat Masterson and Wyatt Earp tried to quell armed violence. Faro players gathered in the White Elephant Saloon, the main meeting place for miners and railroad workers in Bingham, Utah, around 1906. The image records everyday life during the copper boom in the American West, when gambling halls, bars, and brothels formed the social fabric of the temporary boomtowns that flourished around ore veins in the early decades of the 20th century. Martha Jane Canary, known as Calamity Jane, stood out in the folklore of the Old West. By about 1895, she no longer served as a military scout. She roamed the frontier towns of the Great Plains, recounting for a few coins deeds she claimed to have performed in the Sioux Wars. She sold photographs, autographed pamphlets, and rehearsed appearances in traveling shows that turned veterans into characters, foreshadowing her 1896 tour with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. At left, James J. Dolan, Irish merchant and key figure in the Lincoln County War, stands beside the then-young deputy Robert Bob Ollinger in Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory, 1879. 2 years later, while serving as Pat Garrett's jailer, Ollinger would fall to Billy the Kid's gunshots as the prisoner, still handcuffed, escaped from the Lincoln courthouse, an episode that sealed the gunman's notoriety. Portrait of Texas Jack Jr., 1885, restored version. He inherited the nickname in tribute to Texas Jack Omohundro, the frontier scout who died in 1880, and built a career as a showman in Wild West shows. He traveled across 4 continents performing shooting and roping acts, and in 1902 gave Will Rogers his first professional contract. The Mountain Meadows massacre took place from September 7 to 11, 1857. In Utah Territory amid tension between the Mormons and Washington. Mormon militia from Iron County, some disguised and aided by a few Paiutes, surrounded the Fancher-Baker wagon train, about 140 immigrants from Arkansas bound for California. After 5 days, they offered safe conduct, gathered the weapons, separated the travelers, and killed almost all of them, sparing only small children. John D. Lee, militia captain and Indian agent, was convicted in 1876 and executed by firing squad on March 23, 1877, 20 years after the attack. Brigham Young in Salt Lake City, photographed around the early 1870s, a period when, firmly established as president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he oversaw the urban expansion and economic planning of the Utah Territory's capital, consolidating the settlement begun by the Mormon Exodus of 1847. James Pearson Beckworth, born enslaved in Virginia in 1798 and freed while still a boy, became a fur trapper, explorer, and guide in the Rocky Mountains. Between 1824 and 1837, he served with the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, taking part in long beaver collecting expeditions through the Green and Yellowstone valleys. In 1850, he opened Beckworth Pass, the lowest altitude route through the Sierra Nevada, shortening the crossing for migrants bound for California during the gold rush. He also traveled with the Crow, adopting some of their customs, and ended his life in 1866 while visiting a camp of the tribe that had welcomed him for so many years.